Hey everyone, greetings and salutations from Northern California. It is Friday the 13th. It is EMMAUS table launch day. It is Israeli airstrike launch day. It is Iranian ballistic missile launch day. It's just all around launch day on Friday the 13th. How about that? So, I'm glad to be with you. Sorry we're a few minutes late. I was trying to work through some connectivity issues here with my little humble get-up in my office. But hopefully it'll work and things stay smooth and not buffered or freezing or anything weird like that. So, let's dig right into this. And wow. In the words of the great philosopher and thespian Chris Farley, holy shnikes is all I can say. This conflict is the one that we have been anticipating, dreading, in some ways even kind of strangely hoping for years, the past 20 years. And our friends in Israel and even our friends in Iran would agree there's a strange kind of mix of emotions here, where it's almost like this thing has just been building and building and building for 20 years, really ever since Iran's nuclear program became a thing during the Iraq War, if you remember that, back in the early aughts, at the turn of the century, around 2002, 2003, when Iran really began. It kind of had a secret nuclear program going back to the 1980s at least, but really began ramping it up after the United States military invaded Iraq. And so this has been 22 years, this conflict in the making. And so this anticipation, this anxiety, this kind of like what's going to happen eventually with Iran's nuclear program has been building. And so there's this sense of, on the ground, I would say, in talking to people in the region and different nations, both a sense of relief, like finally we're just having it out here, it's finally happening. Actually, a tremendous relief at how well the IDF did in its first wave of strikes against the Iranian regime, not just in Israel, by the way, but also in Iran. And we've been obviously very, very busy bees at The Wire over the past 24 hours or so, posting as much content as we can for you to digest as quickly as you can. Hopefully you have a good metabolism for content on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, because it's been a fire hose over the last 24 hours. So we've been trying to kind of somewhat curate what we throw at you and not just throw every little thing at you that comes across our feeds, either on X or on Telegram, and just kind of hitting the highlights and trying to be somewhat responsible as best as you can in the early days in the fog of a war, to post what we're seeing coming from at least 2 or 3 witnesses. It's one of our principles here at The Wire that every matter is established by the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses. So we try to find disparate witnesses and not just all leading back to the same source. Sometimes that works well. Most of the time it works well for us. Sometimes it doesn't. But all that to say, it's not just what's happening directly between Iran and Israel, and we'll get into that in a minute, but it's also what we see happening in the Kurdish world right now, especially among Kurdish rebel groups that are based in Iraqi Kurdistan, and a lot of chatter on Iranian Kurdish Twitter about this conflict and potentially seeing an opportunity. And a lot of Iranians in Tehran, which has taken the brunt of Israeli airstrikes, celebrating from their high-rises as they see the installations of the regimes and the penthouses of the regime leaders that they hate exploding. And this has been an absolute, again, this has been something that has building and building and building for over 2 decades. And so there's a sense of anticipation, a sense of fear and anxiety, a sense of relief, all of that mixed together for our friends on the ground throughout the region. So, in case you've been under a rock with no cell service for the past 24 hours, in case you did not know, quick recap of the events so far. At 24 hours ago, it looked like nothing would be happening, kinetically speaking, militarily speaking, until after Sunday. Now, what we know now that we didn't know then, maybe we could have suspected it, but we didn't know for sure, is that President Trump's administration was claiming to be denying Israel a green light for military strikes until after the next round, the 6th round of negotiations in Oman, indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran. And obviously, there have been 6 rounds of these talks over the course of 2 months. And it was looking for a while there like Trump's administration was just as much of a roadblock potentially to be Netanyahu's administration cabinet, war cabinet in Israel, as President Biden's administration had been. That is to say, we hadn't seen a whole lot of difference so far in actual diplomatic policy, in substantively speaking, when Steve Witkoff's team would come to the table, whether it was in Rome or in Muscat, Oman, with the, indirectly anyway, with the Iranian negotiators. They never sat across the table from each other because there's no diplomatic relations, so it's kind of like shuttle diplomacy going back and, the Omani team or the Qatari team going back and forth. And everything kind of looked like it had looked for the past, 5 years since the Biden administration restarted negotiations. And Trump had given this deadline of 60 days. But, it's kind of hard to tell with him sometimes. Like, is he serious about that? Is he not serious about that? Is he going to change his mind? And then, are they going to allow, is the U.S. administration going to allow for the Iranians to enrich uranium? Are they not? We're getting all these kind of mixed signals, which now obviously has turned out to be part of the strategy in coming to this moment. Because while President Trump and his team, team of Mideast envoys, were claiming in the press that they had given Bibi a red light, at least for now, in regards to strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, in the background, behind closed doors, they had actually given him the green light. And this was all a ruse in order to lull the Iranian regime into complacency. Oh, Trump's just like Biden. This is just another, another endless series of talks where we can string things out. And now what we know, based on Israeli intelligence that had been shared with the United States and then shared with the Five Eyes, with the 5 major English-speaking allies across the world, is that Iran was very, very close. I mean, we knew that they had enough enriched uranium to build 15 bombs, and that it took just a matter of a week to enrich that up to weapons grade, because of the so-called breakout period. We didn't know how close they were to actually constructing a bomb. Again, if you watch the movie Oppenheimer, it's not just about enriching the uranium or the plutonium or whatever it may be. It's about actually constructing a device that can implode it into a critical mass and detonate it to create a nuclear explosion. That's a whole other thing. And then you have to put it all together and test it and make sure it works. So we knew that Iran could have enough weapons-grade uranium in about a week for a bomb, but we didn't know how close they were to actually constructing the other components of a bomb. And now what has been publicly released is that they were very close. And Israel, the Israeli government, felt that it was down to the wire, no pun intended, and that they had to move forward, and they couldn't wait for another 5 or 6 rounds of talks in Oman or Qatar or Rome or anywhere else. If they were going to stop Iran from getting a bomb, they had to do it now. And Trump secretly gave them the green light, while all the time also claiming publicly that he wanted to continue negotiations, which ironically I don't think is untrue. He's still claiming that he wants to meet with, or that he wants his team to meet with Iran in Oman this weekend, which obviously isn't happening. So in this scenario, interestingly, we have, and the Wire posted this really, we thought, excellent analogy of this sort of good cop, bad cop, where Bibi's government and the IDF has become the bad cop, and you kind of take turns going into the interview room, and the good cop roughs up the suspect, the bad cop comes in and roughs up the suspect and threatens him, and then the good cop comes in and says, I'm really sorry about that. Maybe we could just have another conversation and talk through this a little bit more. I'd hate to have Officer Smith come back in. So let's have a conversation really quick. So that guy's crazy. That guy is crazy. He's insane. I want to help you. I really, really want to help you. And so you have this sort of really interesting geopolitical good cop, bad cop going on right now. And of course, outside, behind the two-way mirror, the two cops are, you go in and you're going to do this, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do that. And Iran is just totally caught off guard. Like, they were not expecting this at all. They should have probably been a little bit more wise to the possibility of this happening. With the guy that assassinated Qasem Soleimani in office in the United States, dropped a bomb on his car in the Baghdad airport 5 years ago. But, they had gotten lulled into complacency. And so they were completely unprepared for the first round of strikes on day 61 after Trump's 60-day deadline. The first wave of 200 Israeli warplanes crossing the border, either just across the border in Iraq or crossing the border into Iranian airspace, hitting mostly targets in Tehran at first, hitting their top military leadership. And not only the regular military, but in all these dictatorships, you always have the regular military, and then you have, whatever branch of the real military authority that's strictly loyal to the dictator himself, right? Or in this case, to the Ayatollahs, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Within the first hour, the top brass of the military and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps were dead in an hour. Iran somehow figured out, through their clandestine services, through the Mossad, how to get all the top Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps leadership into a room for a meeting and keep them there waiting for a meeting to start, and then bombed the meeting and killed all of them. Just incredibly shocking turn of events. Not unlike the pager, the Pagergate, I guess that you could call it, in Lebanon with Lebanese Hezbollah a few months ago, where the entire top leadership of Lebanese Hezbollah was taken out, all of whom had pagers, and then the underground meeting of Hassan Nasrallah and his top leadership in a bunker in Beirut exploded. And the entire command leadership of Hezbollah was completely decapitated. Here we don't see something quite that dramatic or drastic yet, but we see something pretty devastating to the Republic, the Islamic Republic of Iran, just in the first hour of the war. You have not only that, but you have Iran's entire S-300 air defense system sold to them by the Russian military. Their most advanced air defense system, their only hope of stopping Israeli fighter jets and Israeli bombers from having open skies over Iran, were all taken out, all sabotaged by Mossad teams on the ground, working with Iranian operations, rebel operations on the ground in Iran. And missile batteries taken out, obviously, by airstrikes, by a drone factory that was constructed inside Iran by the Mossad, and by cyber warfare. So Iran was completely neutralized for the first few hours of the conflict. They could do nothing in response to Iranian airstrikes except launch a few dozen drones towards Israel, which took several hours to get there, and were all shot down. Meanwhile, it was open season for the Israeli Air Force on Iranian nuclear sites, Iranian military figures and their penthouses, what I think will probably be called the penthouse massacre of 2025. You had 4 top Iranian military and IRGC figures assassinated and 9 top Iranian nuclear scientists assassinated all around the country. And that's after that first wave. Everybody's expecting, one of the enrichment facilities to blow up first. No, Israel went after command and control and over the commanders themselves in the first hour, and then began going after the nuclear sites methodically and patiently. Not only the nuclear sites, the enrichment sites, but also research sites, research reactors, a heavy water site in Iraq. I will show you not Iraq, Arak, A-R-A-K. Some of them more than once. So there's a combination of things going on these enrichment sites. First of all, are the cascades of enrichment reactors, which are actually doing the work to enrich the uranium underground, deep underground. These are mountainous caves deep underground under mountain ranges inside of Iran. And there's a question as to whether or not Israel has a type of what are called massive ordnance penetrators, or these, the bombs that can kind of burrow down into solid rock up to 100, 200 meters or more. And then there's a fuse on the bomb, so it kind of penetrates down into the rock as far as it can go. And then the fuse, it kind of like, dynamite in the movies, you see the fuse going down, and then boom. So those aren't actual dynamite fuses, though. They're timed fuses, right? So there's a question as to whether or not Israel has ordnance penetrators that can penetrate that deep into solid rock, into solid granite in some cases, to be able to reach these underground, these huge, vast underground silos of cascading, these enrichment reactors that are cascaded together. They pass the fuel, the uranium fuel through these cascades to enrich it. Massive farms almost of reactors underground. There's a question as to whether or not Israel has the capability to reach those sites. And it's not so much about reaching all the way down into the room with the bomb, but deep enough that you can create an avalanche, an internal avalanche of sorts, and the cave, implodes on itself. We don't know if that's happened. There has been evidence. In fact, Iranian state television has already announced that there is nuclear fallout at one of these sites. So there won't be a nuclear explosion, so to speak, because the uranium, as far as we know, isn't weapons grade, and it's not constructed into a bomb that's detonated. But there would be nuclear fallout, so to speak. Think of like maybe a lighter version of Chernobyl, or what is often referred to as a dirty bomb, where you just use a conventional bomb to explode nuclear material and just spread radioactivity without there being a nuclear explosion. Think of that on a much larger scale inside of these nuclear sites. And so there has been radiation detected now at these sites, which means that radioactive material, nuclear material, is being affected, whether that's above ground or below ground or both, we don't know. But besides the underground enrichment sites at these sites, there's also above ground sites. There's military bases. These are all military bases. So there's a military base with personnel. There's research. There's all kinds of things going on above ground at these sites. So we know for most of the larger sites that anything above ground is now completely obliterated. What's happened below ground, we don't know yet, and the Israeli military hasn't told us yet. The American Air Force has, at least publicly, we have public knowledge of the American military having massive ordnance penetrators that can burrow much deeper into solid rock than the Israeli penetrators can. But that's what we know. And we don't know what we don't. Thank you. And not reactors, centrifuges. I don't know why I keep saying reactors. Thank you for that correction there. So there's these long streams of cascading centrifuges for enriching uranium in these facilities. Whether or not they're still active, we don't know, or whether or not they're still operational, we don't know. Whether or not the United States military might become involved, and at that point, we're talking about B-2s, stealth bombers, or B-52s dropping these very, very, very large bombs on these sites. We don't know. So far, Iran has been very careful not to bomb any American military installations throughout the region. Although they threatened to, they have been careful not to do that so far, or allow their proxies, especially in Iran, to do so. There's been some demonstrations in the Green Zone in Iran and in Baghdad, where these PMFs, the Hashd al-Shabi, Iranian-sponsored militias in Iraq, have been demonstrating and sort of riding out in the streets. But no attacks yet, no rockets flying over the Green Zone wall or anything else like that yet. So Iran has been very careful not to escalate this with the American military and drag the American military into the conflict. And so far, the American military has not operated in an offensive capacity in support of Israel. We don't really know for sure entirely what capacity they have been operating. They have at least been involved, the United States Navy and Air Force has been at least involved in helping to shoot down drones and cruise missiles, and potentially ballistic missiles too. The difference being ballistic missiles, go up out of the atmosphere into space and then have reached this kind of like terminal velocity and come down, making them much faster, and there's a much shorter time frame for them to reach Israel as opposed to cruise missiles, which take an hour or two, and drones which take more than a couple hours. So we know the American military has been involved in a defensive capacity on Israel's behalf. Whether they've been involved certainly they've been involved in an intelligence capacity. We know that for sure. Logistically, maybe, refueling, that kind of stuff, we don't know. It's certainly diplomatically behind the scenes as well. But so far, Iran has tenuously managed to keep the United States out of this because they probably know that to drag the United States into this will mean it will bode ill for their nuclear sites, shall we say. Thanks, Victoria. Yes, there have been sirens in Baghdad at the Green Zone, sirens in Erbil as well at the U.S. base there. Explosions heard there. Some of our friends in Iraqi Kurdistan have been giving us updates lately over the past few hours. But so far mostly quiet there. Remember, this is fog of war. So reports of things, wars and rumors of wars, right? So reports of things happening. I saw earlier there were some reports of explosions over the Erbil airport, where the U.S. military base is located very nearby. That could have been interceptions of Iranian missiles going over the border. We don't really know yet. Again, trying our best to kind of parse through things and curate the material that we're presenting to you without getting too sensationalistic. So what we know now is based on those rounds of airstrikes. And by the way, the airstrikes are ongoing. Like, it hasn't stopped. It's pretty much 24/7 at this point. Israel is bombing something in Iran. And we're just kind of getting, piecemeal reports of it as reports come out. Unfortunately, the internet is much more restricted in Iran than it is in Israel. So for people to get videos out is a little bit more challenging. We are following some Iranian news on Telegram. By the way, if you can find, and we'll be posting some of our Telegram channels that we follow. If you aren't on Telegram, X is great. Telegram is also a great source of information. The difference being it's not all coming into one feed. It's not all collated for you into one feed. There's different channels that you have to go through. But if you can find like 2 or 3 good Israeli Telegram channels, 2 or 3 good Iranian Telegram channels, and Iraqi Telegram channels, and we'll be sharing some of our favorites with you. That is also a good source of information. As much of the Mideast world uses Telegram more so than WhatsApp or X or Facebook or the other social media apps. So what we know now is after these few waves of airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes in Iran, there's at least 78 casualties. We don't have the breakdown of military versus civilian, assuming at least some civilians were killed, unfortunately, due to the fact that they are probably family members or residents of nearby apartments or such of these top-level regime figures who were targeted for assassination. If you saw some of the photos or videos of those airstrikes, those pinpoint airstrikes, you see it's just incredible. The Israelis send a very small munition through a window and kill someone in a bedroom, and literally the rest of the building is fine. They don't even knock the power out in the building or all the windows. So obviously, as always, the Israeli military is going above and beyond to do its best to minimize civilian casualties, as they do in Gaza, as they have in Lebanon, etc., etc. So, but 78 casualties so far in Iran. Once Iran finally was able to get up from getting the wind knocked out of it, the regime that is, and was able to mount a counterattack, we've had now several waves of ballistic missiles and drones and other kinds of return fire back towards Israel. At least 3 waves of ballistic missiles, about 100 to 150 so far. Mostly, it seems, directed at the Tel Aviv metro area. And there's this kind of swath of central Israel from Tel Aviv, and then there's Highway 1 all the way across to Jerusalem. And that's where more than half of the population of the country lives. And so whenever the Houthis, lob a ballistic missile into central Israel to remind everybody that they're still alive, they always point it towards Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, right? And so that's where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is directing their salvos of ballistic missiles now. And so far, the Israeli military, with some support from its friends in the Arab and Western world, have managed to intercept most of those missiles, many of them before they even reach Israeli airspace, some of them after they've reached Israeli airspace with David's sling. Most of those missiles have been intercepted. Some of them, as you've seen if you've been following the wire, have gotten through. At best, Israel's Iron Dome and David's sling missile defense systems are 90% successful, which means when you're talking about 100 ballistic missiles being fired at Israel all at once, you're going to get 85 to 90 of them, and 10 to 15 of them are going to get through. And in those cases, hopefully most of them fall in open areas, and as we've already seen today, some of them have not, and have landed in downtown Tel Aviv, including one of them somewhat close to IDF headquarters. And it looked like maybe an interceptor launched just as that missile was landing, perhaps, malfunctioned and didn't lock onto it and deploy fast enough. So what we know so far about Israeli casualties is at least one elderly Israeli woman is dead, at least one other in critical condition, and somewhere I've seen anywhere between 25 to 40 injured, anywhere from lightly to moderately injured. That was after the second wave. I'm still waiting to see at this point, and some of you may be following along and can report, after the third wave of Iranian missiles just about an hour ago, There were several residential buildings that were leveled. It looked like they were completely leveled in Tel Aviv. And so we were waiting to see what reports were from rescue workers that were working at those sites. Obviously, most people in all across Israel, and especially in Tel Aviv, would have been in shelters at that point, which gives them a much better chance of survival in the event of a direct hit like that. But we just don't know yet. So, as an Israeli official told Glenn Beck yesterday, this isn't even the middle yet. This isn't even the end of the beginning yet. We're still in like the beginning or the middle of the beginning of this. So we got a long way to go, and we will be hanging out with you through it all. So thank you for your prayers, by the way. We did put out an appeal for prayer yesterday. Obviously, as you all know, we have friends in the region, in Israel. Steph is in the Golan Heights. We have team members in other countries, including, as always, Iraqi Kurdistan. So, whether they're or not they're in the direct line of fire, they may have things flying over their heads or sirens going off, and it's just a tense time for everyone in the region. So we appreciate your prayer for them. And, I just noticed as I was getting ready to start this live stream that it's been about 90 days since the last one. It was about 90 days before that. So I think it's probably going to be less than 90 days moving forward for the live wires. So looking forward to hanging out with some of you some more. And we might even get on kind of a maybe even regular cadence. I'm not going to throw out a number yet, but a regular program here for the wire. And now that we are under the EMMAUS banner, we're excited about what God is going to do through this ministry going forward. So, all right, that is all I have for you for now. And if you have any questions, any comments, any updates, feel free to share them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to go home and get ready for dinner. But I'm here with you to the end, so I can wait. Got 128 with us today. Yeah, sorry if it's been a little glitchy. I had to do kind of a last minute connection change here, a connection switcheroo, to make sure that everything is working properly. So sorry about that. Sorry if there's been any freezing or buffering. All right, guys. Again, thanks for joining. Thanks for your support. Happy launch day, whatever that means to you. And look forward to... Oh, wait. Bible Prophecy Rascal coming in the clutch with a question. One minute here. Been interested in this al-Jilani fella. Seems like Israel has been speaking peace with him. Also, an American pastor met him. Interesting. I didn't know about the pastor meeting him. I do know he's met with Christian leaders, or his team, his government has met with Christian leaders inside of Syria as part of his campaign to prove himself to be a newer, more tolerant, more moderate version of himself. And that he's not like ISIS that's going to try to, to spray paint the Nazarene symbol on everybody's door in advance of death squads going out to assassinate everybody like ISIS did. So, as we've said before, al-Jilani saw what happened to ISIS and has obviously taken the opposite tact. He sees that there's not much of a future in going full jihad, as they might say on Tropic Thunder. You want to maybe go, well-dressed, slick-looking, moderate, kind of maybe jihad, not really jihad. Jihad means something else. We're doing political jihad now. And that's kind of the persona that he has presented to the world, at least for now. And he's done an excellent job of it. He's a very convincing guy. He comes across very genuinely in interviews, very sincerely, that he regrets his involvement with Al-Qaeda, and he sees, that's just not the path. And but the actions of his followers on the street and the cell phone videos that they upload to Telegram tell a different story. And if you're an Alawite, a non-Sunni Muslim living in Syria, or if you're a Kurd living in Syria, or if you're a Druze, a non-Muslim Arab, they wouldn't call themselves Arab, but a non-Muslim Druze living in Syria, you might have a different experience with his militias than he likes to portray to the media. So, who knows? We don't know at this point who he is or who he's going to turn out to be. He is an interesting candidate. He is somebody that we should pay attention to. Yep, definitely wants to reestablish the caliphate. Well, he's Muslim Brotherhood, just like Recep Tayyip Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood, just like the Qatari Emir is Muslim Brotherhood, just like the former president of Egypt, Mohammed Morsi, was, and he's still alive, but is Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, and we've talked about this before, I think, but the Muslim Brotherhood was established in the 1920s after the end of the last Turkish Sultanate. The last Islamic Caliphate in Turkey was dissolved by the Turkish Republic led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in 1923, after the end of the World War I and the Turkish Revolution, the Young Turkish Revolution, the Young Turks took over what became the Republic of Turkey, formed a new nominally democratic government that has been democratic or dictatorial at different times over the past 80 years, 100 years. And as part of that reform, Ataturk abolished the caliphate. And not long after that, a lowly school teacher, an Islamic scholar in Egypt, founded what became known as Il-Ikhwan, the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And it became a political party that believed in the establishment of Muslim governments and Muslim governance throughout Muslim lands, the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, through democratic means. That is to say, using democratic processes that were just in their infancy after World War I, as these Middle Eastern nations began gaining independence from colonial powers. And they were kind of flirting with democracy for a while, or some form of democratic monarchy, before they just went full dictatorship, most of them in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the Muslim Brotherhood came along as a popular party, as you could call the People's Party, which was it's a true political party, and true with charities and social programs and militias that sort of champion the cause of the people against these evil, despotic kings or dictators or whatever they may be in the different countries throughout the Middle East. And so again, their goal, their stated chartered goal, is to establish Islamic governments, Islamist governments, in the nations throughout the Middle East. And whenever they've had an opportunity to do so, they've tried to do so. They tried to do so when the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak fell in Egypt in 2011, February 2011. Mohammed Morsi was elected to power in Egypt, and he's kind of of the same ilk as al-Shana or al-Jilani. He doesn't have the Al-Qaeda background, but he had the same goal of establishing an Islamic government in Egypt. That is, until al-Sisi's government led a counter-revolution and kicked him out of power, because Egypt wasn't having it. So, so far, al-Shara, aka al-Jilani, has done a very good job and a brutally effective job of consolidating power in Syria. making treaties where he's needed to make treaties, using a heavy hand where he's needed to use a heavy hand. And he has been a very successful both political and military leader. Keep in mind, the Muslim Brotherhood is the father and the grandfather of Sunni jihadist movements throughout the Middle East. The Muslim Brotherhood spawned Islamic Jihad, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which spawned Palestinian Islamic Jihad. A guy had a spiritual advisor. A guy named Osama bin Laden had a spiritual advisor named al-Zawahiri, who was an Egyptian who came from Islamic Jihad and was the spiritual, you could kind of say, leader of what became Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And then al-Zawahiri actually became the leader of Al-Qaeda after Osama bin Laden was assassinated, and I think it was 2011. He came from Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which came from the Muslim Brotherhood. You know, ISIS came from Al-Qaeda. And so all of these groups kind of grew out of it, branched out from each other. And the most vicious and wicked and demonic of jihadist organizations in the world today, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any of their offshoots or franchises in the Middle East or Africa or Asia, can all trace their roots back to the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is the Palestinian chapter of Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So, hopefully that answers your question. But yes, the goal for the Muslim Brotherhood is Islamic government, and we don't know what ultimately that caliphate or Islamic kingdom, that confederation of 10 nations will look like. But we know it'll be a confederation. It's not going to be just one contiguous empire. It's going to be a confederation of 10 nations, which ironically fits very well with the modern geopolitical scenario of modern nation states, right, in the Middle East. Good question. What do we look for biblically, prophetically from this? Do you think it will set the stage for a 7-year peace agreement or any other major signs that we should watch for? Paul Hoyt. Good question. That's always a question, right? What is this leading to, or what does this mean? Unfortunately, my answer is I just don't know yet. We've always known, if you read Ezekiel 38, where the prophet describes a land at rest from war and a land of unwalled villages, we know that the scenario and the zeitgeist in Israeli society leading up to the surprise of the abomination that causes desolation, the beginning of Jacob's trouble. We know that the feeling, the vibe, you could say, in Israel at that time is going to be peace. Israel is going to feel like it's won the war, and it's a land at rest from war. And for many years, we just always assumed that the wars that the passage was referring to were the big Arab-Israeli wars in the 40s and 60s and 70s, right? And it's been 50 years since then. And it wasn't until October 7th that we understood that the land was never truly at rest from war, that there were always these proxy forces, the Iranian threat that's been there since the late 70s, and other threats, the Syrian regime, Lebanese Hezbollah, Hamas, all of these groups, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, and the other Fatah movements in the West Bank, that Israel's never really been at rest from war, and that has never really felt secure enough in the proverbial unwalled villages to meet that criterion. What would it take for Israel to get there? Well, again, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned Daniel 9:27, that there is a covenant that man, the little horn, affirms for 1:7. So there is some kind of covenant or agreement that is affirmed by this man, whether or not he's involved in the initiation of it or just comes along and joins it later on. There's something that this man affirms that leads to a stipulated 7 years of peace. It would seem like it's the stated 7 years because the covenant is 4:1-7. And so the question is this ongoing war now between Israel and Iran leading up to that? Could Israel have reasonably signed a peace agreement and have felt as though it was a land at rest from war without the removal of the Iranian threat? And I would say no. Something had to happen with Iran, whether it's this war that completely defangs it and neutralizes it somehow, and it's just a shell of itself, which looks like that's at least going to happen, or whether it means as much as the implosion of the regime and the end of the regime itself. We don't know, but something is going to happen to neutralize the Iranian regime, because they're not going to have a true change of heart, right? This is a genocidal, apocalyptic death cult. And so militarily, somehow, they'll have that threat has to be removed. And what we may be seeing right now is the beginning stages of that. How long that's going to take, what all the steps are in between, the timeline, can't tell you. And anybody that tries to tell you, I would take with a grain of salt. We just don't know. The Lord is more intentionally vague, if you've noticed, about events leading up to the abomination of desolation, that first half of of Daniel's 70th week. The Lord's more vague about those milestones than he is about that marker at the midpoint of the 7. And we can speculate as to why. I would say we don't need to know all the details. The thing Jesus tells us to look for, the thing he says, let the reader understand, that he cites from Daniel, that's quoted in Daniel 4 times, is the abomination that causes desolation. When you see this up on the wing of the temple, this is what you do. Leave, run, get out now. That's the instruction to us from Jesus for that time, for those who are in Judea at least. And that's how we know anywhere else in the world that the tribulation, the great one, as it's stated in the Greek, is beginning, and it's certainly in some sense or shape or form going to touch all of us throughout the world. So prophetically, I think this is definitely another step closer to that. I wouldn't say there's any direct correlation in Scripture. I can't point at a verse and say this is that, other than it's just another hurdle removed to the formation of potentially that 10-nation coalition, and the affirmation by that little horn of that covenant for 1-7. What order those things are going to happen, we don't know. Again, the Lord's a little more vague about the order and timing of things, at least in the first half of the 7. Is it wrong to try to get away from hot spots like Europe, for example? I want to move my young family to South America to try and escape the growing threats of Islamic takeover. Good question, and I really can't. I really can't answer that question for you, Leora. That's a good question. I would say, that's the kind of thing that you want to huddle up with your spouse, your kids if they're old enough to have these conversations, friends, parents, family, other believers, elders in your church, trusted people in your life, and pray. And I would probably, for a decision like that, fast and pray. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that question. I know for me, the Lord's planted me in Northern California. Not too dicey where I live necessarily, but there's things going on in the state that are in the news, and housing prices are insane. But so far, we've talked about moving. Should we move? Things are expensive. Things could happen here. The state's kind of crazy, and that kind of thing. And we've always felt very impressed that God has us here for a reason. He's shown that both. I'd say he's spoken to our hearts about that. He's shown that through practical means as well, as he's really embedded us with a community of believers here. And obviously we have family, kids and grandkids here. And, I have this congregation that I serve here in the town where I live. And I just haven't felt a really strong sense that the Lord has, usually I would take a sense in my heart or in my gut, whatever you want to call that, the Lord, putting something on my heart to do something, and also doors opening in that direction for me to make a decision like that. It has to be more than a feeling, as Foreigner once sang. More than a feeling. That was Foreigner, right? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But at the same time, I can't say that you shouldn't. The Lord may have for you to move. Wherever you go, I would say here's the grid through which you view decisions like that. Is this place, whether I'm here or there, is this the best place that God would plant me to be a witness for the gospel to my local community, and the best place for me to participate in the mission, the global mission? I would say if you dig down to the bottom of that question, if that decision is coming from a place of fear or convenience or concern or doubt, I would say that's not of the Lord. The Lord calls us to perseverance, not preservation, as my pastor says. We are not called to preserve ourselves necessarily. We're called to persevere in the Lord. And it's the Lord's job to preserve us. And he does. Even in death, he preserves us, right? So if you are approaching that question from the standpoint of, is this the place that God has me to go to fulfill his assignment, his calling on my life, then I'd say that's the right way to ask the question. If it's from, oh no, I don't want to be around all this insanity, maybe if there's kids involved, again, I can't completely say that that's wrong. Maybe there's other considerations here, but I would be leery of making decisions based on self-preservation. Hope that helps. I don't know. But again, I'm just a guy on the internet. So I'd say definitely circle up with pastors and friends and elders and see what they have to say. Boston, thank you. Boston. Singer with a high-pitched voice, right? One of the best rock albums of all time, right? Okay. Do I believe Third Temple will be rebuilt in this time of peace? Good question, Rafaela. I think maybe we ought to do I've been kicking around the idea of doing a series, teaching series on the temple. Not just the millennial temple, but the temple as it's presented throughout Scripture, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden being a form of a temple where God met with his people. So maybe we'll do that someday, I don't know. But yes, there must be some kind of structure built or repurposed on the Temple Mount for the man of lawlessness to sit in and therefore proclaim himself to be God by his sitting in God's seat in the temple. That structure must exist somehow. Now, it doesn't have to exist on day one. As we know, the Temple Institute's already fabricated all the implements needed for sacrifices, and even an altar, a functioning altar. So in the event that a covenant is signed for 1/7, whether that covenant allows for sacrifices or the sacrifices begin before that or they're related or not, we don't know for sure. It would seem that the covenant from 1:7 allows for the sacrifices on the Temple Mount. We just don't know for sure. But however those two things are interrelated, it would seem that that the sacrifices could begin fairly soon. You just need the altar for the daily sacrifice. Daniel is concerned with the daily sacrifice, what's called the perpetual sacrifice, the morning and evening sacrifice, the olat. So that's when a lamb is sacrificed in the morning and in the evening. So if we see a red heifer sacrificed, or we see some kind of grain offering on the Temple Mount or something, don't get your skivvies in a bunch. That doesn't mean that sacrifices have begun on the Temple Mount. Daniel is concerned specifically with a certain type of sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. When we see those begin, then the clock is literally ticking. 1,290 days. Well, 2,300 days actually from that point until the return of the Lord. So, yes, there will be something. There will be some kind of structure there. What it will be, we don't know. Red heifers, yes. And I do believe, if we see a sacrifice of red heifers on the Mount of Olives or on the Temple Mount or whatever it ends up happening, as a way of sanctifying, that would be sort of like a forerunner of the sacrifices that would happen on the Temple Mount, right? The daily sacrifices, as a means of cleansing and preparing the priests and their implements for the sacrificial system. We know now that those red heifers are, last I read, are near where the tabernacle used to be in Shiloh, and a farm, and that they've undergone a series of priestly halakhic inspections to make sure that they are unblemished. And last I heard it was determined that they were unblemished. But somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that. What about teaching on Mystery Babylon? Excellent question. I'd love another teaching on Mystery Babylon. That would definitely be Joel Richardson's wheelhouse. So we're going to have Joel in as a fly-by-night guest as often as we can. And sure, maybe the sky's the limit right now. Welcome to the Emmaus table. It's time to dream. Let's make Maranatha Global Bible Study great again. Yes, 70th week can indeed start without a temple at first. 70th week could start tomorrow. We don't even necessarily know that the sacrifices begin on day 1 of the 70th week, or how that covenant is interrelated with the sacrifices. It would seem that they're concurrent with each other, right? They happen around the same time. Whether they're directly related to each, whether one is causal towards the other, we don't know. All right. I'll make sure I didn't miss any questions here. Yes, Temple Institute is poised and ready for the next temple. Absolutely. The cleansing of Zechariah coincides with the end of the 2,300 days. Very good. Yep, we're not MAGA. We're What would MGBS be? I gotta be careful when you say that. Megibus. Make Megibus great again. Is Joel a guest or part of a new platform? I would say he's more than a guest and less than a regular contributor. Stephanie would be the better authority on that than I would be. I just work here. Steph's my boss. She runs the place, so she could tell you better than I can. But Joel's certainly in our group of collaborators and content creators. So how often he's going to be in and out, we don't know. Obviously, he's trying to finish up his book and is doing lots of tours to Israel and Saudi and doing all the things that Joel does, whittling things and staining things. And so we'll of course have him in the room as often as we can. Joel is director of bad dad jokes. There's never been a truer statement uttered in this chat. Leora, thank you so much for your kind answer. Last year in a dream, the Lord told me to leave the UK because Europe will be at war in 4 years. We had felt strong this about that. Slowly move towards that. Hey, if the Lord is calling you to do that, who am I to tell you otherwise? Go with via con Dios. Go with God. All right, guys, I think I will call it a day. It is 5:30 my time, and I've talked myself into an appetite. Debbie, I actually answered that question. I think it is a full-blown war at this time. I think the gloves have come off. Whether it's going to lead to regime change in Iran, not sure. But man, the Iranian regime looks pretty shaky right now. And I would almost guarantee you, that there are elements of the Iranian government that are in communication with the Israeli government and the American government for a coup, for an overthrow of the Ayatollahs. I can guarantee it. How and if and when and how that happens, I have no idea. That's probably how it would have to happen. This isn't just going to be people rioting in the streets, because we've seen that over and over again for the past decade, and it hasn't resulted in regime change. It's going to be an internal thing. And we now know that there were very high-level people. The leader of the Iranian Quds Force, Ibrahim, I'm trying to remember his last name, Qasami? No, that's the guy that died. Anyway, the leader of the Quds Force for the IRGC, we now know was an Israeli agent, double agent. So you can bet the Israelis have people on the inside in Iran. That's probably where they get a lot of the information about who to bomb and where and when and how. And so, yeah, that day may be coming soon. And it may just be a matter of time until it can happen. But we shall see. What is the one rule of the Middle East? What's the one thing you can always know? Is that you don't know what's going to happen next. Ain't nobody know. All right, y'all. With that, I think I'm going to call it a day or a night wherever you may be in the world. We love you. We missed spending time with you. This is great. I'm glad that the first thing on EMMAUS got to be the live wire. And I look forward to our upcoming series on Luke 24. This is going to be our flagship study on the Emmaus Road. Steph and I are going to tag team that one with some special guests, sprinkle it in there in between. And blessings to you. We love you all. Maranatha.